Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more about lab report writing. Most people kind of regard lab report writing as something that is really difficult. As a matter of fact, some of them seem to think that it's more like a torture travel. So like if you had to run the gauntlet, it's like a torture gauntlet, and you can see this this cartoon kind of helps us to understand that a little bit. So we need to make sure that we have a little bit less level of anxiousness than this, because it doesn't have to be this hard. So let's see what we can do to help that out. So first, lab report format. I am not looking for a set number of pages. I am not looking for a 10-page paper necessarily. I'm looking for a paper that has all of the things it needs. So the first thing a paper needs always is the title page. So what you see here on this side is the title page. This is a page in and of itself. It's always the first page. It's not included in the content. It gives you the title, which is the title that you would give it just like you would in your journal, the date that you performed the experiment, your full name, the class period, and my name. So all of these things need to be on the first page. Notice that they should be centered and large in the middle of the page, okay? Then the other 6 things are needed in the following pages. Now I only have a single page right here. That doesn't mean that you do all of this in one page and squeeze it all in. That's not what that means. What this means is that you do these things and the following pages will contain these items. The first item that you have to have is an abstract. Notice how it's italicized. And you're going to see when we have the discussion about the abstract, it needs to be italicized. Okay, notice the background is next, purpose, procedure, results, conclusion. These are the 6 items that need to be in the following pages after your title page. Okay, so this could be 2+ pages or more, depending on how much you write, depending on what you have to say, depending on how big your data table is, depending on lots of things. But I'm not going to tell you how many pages. I'm going to tell you have all 6 of these items and have them complete. And if you have them complete, it doesn't matter how many pages there are, as long as those items are there and complete, okay? So the report overall. It should have a title page with information from the first slide. Remember, we saw that on the very first slide, centered in the page. The abstract should begin the paper and be in italics. Notice it says italics right there. Make sure that you do that because we want to set it apart. It's something that in most papers gets published separately as well. Okay, we're going to bullet each section through the entire report, but that doesn't mean that I bullet and indent all of the way, okay? As a matter of fact, I would rather not say bullet. I would say title each section more than bullet. So why don't we title each section? So you're going to see something like background. Okay, you're going to see something like background, and you're going to put a colon, and then you're going to start writing your background information underneath it. And then when you get to the purpose, you'll write purpose. Okay, and then you'll type the purpose below that. And then you keep going. So when I say bullet, I mean really title. So don't bullet. Title each section and then do the report after that. That will get us less into this idea of spacing and the bullet spacing and not having the correct margins, okay? So let me clear off some stuff. All right, so remember, we are not going to have a bullet. We're going to have a title, okay? So title, we're going to title each section, okay? Then we write only in third person. You never refer to yourself or any partners or any person. I know you guys have been having a hard time with it. It seems very generic and it's very awkward, but you do get used to it, and many of you have come a long way from your very first tries in procedure writing. And if you were to look at your procedures, you will notice that you've come a long way, but you have to give yourself some credit for that, okay? So the number of pages, starting with the first of the report in the bottom center. So I want you to number the pages at the bottom. So you're going to number the page with the first page of the report. And there is a way on Word that you can skip that, so you're going to have to kind of figure that out. It's not hard, but you can do it. If you need help, you know where to come and find me with, okay? You're going to use 12-point Arial or New Times Roman fonts only, and you're going to use 1.5 spacing for all typed written work. So you're not going to use double spacing. You're not going to use 15-point font, 14-point font, 18-point font. You're going to use 12-point Arial or New Times Roman, and that is it. Anything else, and it's not going to be okay. Make all data tables and graphs using the computer. These can be added as appended pages if you need to, but I think that including them in the paper, in the body of the paper, is just as good, and it's actually good practice in using those techniques. So why don't you go ahead and add them in the main body and not do them as appendages unless it's absolutely necessary. So make all tables and graphs using the computer. So everybody in here should know how to do that because you've done some of this before. Most of you can figure out just about anything when it comes to the computer. So now you have to figure out how to use it for your educational and academic things. So what are the 6 essential components? We've already talked about them. We've already seen all of them. An abstract with a summary of the experiment in 4 to 6 sentences. We're going to talk about all of these a little bit more in just a moment. Statement of purpose, okay? Background, summary of the procedure, summary of the results, and significance of findings or the conclusion. Here are all of the things that you need, and it gives you kind of a generic form of what you're supposed to do there. So we need to make sure that we have all of these things in our paper. We need to make sure that all of them are completely done and done well, okay? So what is an abstract? An abstract is, it summarizes the contents of the experiment by answering the questions. What did you do in the experiment? What you did in the experiment? What did you do? How did you do it? What did you find out? And what conclusions can you make? It's written so that each of these questions is answered in like a single sentence or less. And you want somebody without a science background to understand what you're talking about, so you don't want it to be so scientific that it's off-putting for somebody who's not scientific, but you want it to be somewhat scientific so that it's not off-putting for somebody who is scientific. So you got to find a balance there. It's concise. It's no more than a paragraph. It appears at the beginning of the report in italics. And it's also used so the reader can decide whether they're interested in your entire paper or not. So it's a really important part of a formal lab report. So you need to make sure you follow the standard. Background. Background is pretty simple. This is where you write about the science of your experiment. You must do research here and have sources that are cited. Citations must be done in APA. You search for Purdue Al APA in the search engine for more for information. Or you can use this link. If you put Purdue Al APA in, you're going to find what you need. If you don't, then you're not going to have it right. So make sure that you look for your citations, because when you finish your paper, you're going to have something called a bibliography page, and that is where you're going to put your citations, and they have to be done in APA for you to get full credit on that portion of your paper. Okay? So background is where you do research. So what did you talk about? You talked about empirical formula. That requires mole calculations. That requires an understanding of percent composition. So there are quite a few topics that you talked about here, and so you need to be discussing those topics about your experiment and why your experiment is important to them. Purpose usually comes after the background. It tells the overall purpose of the experiments in sentence form. It should be a discussion of all the things you wish to accomplish in the lab. So think about all the things you want to accomplish, using the equipment more appropriately, calculating the empirical formula, being more precise with your measurements. All of those things should be discussed in there if those are things that you had a purpose for. Procedure, the procedure begins right after the purpose. It should not be a copy of what I wrote. If it is, you're going to get a 0. It should be a summary of the important steps, directions, materials, and equipment. And when I say materials and equipment, I do not want a list of materials and equipment. I want to see that you understand how they were used. It should be a summary. I should be able to read it and understand exactly what you did, but it shouldn't bore the heck out of me. It shouldn't be so mundane that I'm like, oh my gosh, if I have to read another word of this. Okay, so make sure you get the important steps and the directions that are very important that tell me how the materials and equipment were used in the lab. Don't list materials and equipment. Don't just bore me to death. Okay, here we go. It should not contain a list of materials, rather how the materials are used. It should be in paragraph form, not in bulleted form. Okay, so make sure you do these things for the procedure. Results. This should also be in paragraph form and have data tables and graphs interspersed throughout the paragraph. It includes data tables, calculations, graphs, and/or diagrams. All of these things are important in the results section. So the data is represented in tables. Data tables are given titles. Columns and rows are labeled with quantity and dimension. You'll notice here it says grams of CaMO3 per 1 milliliter of H2O. It says crystallization temperature in degrees Celsius. All of the things are there that we need to know to understand what's going on. So please make sure that you represent your tables just like this is being represented. Calculations. The calculations portion should include one complete calculation. And the calculation you're going to do is your empirical formula. You're going to do that calculation. You're obviously going to check the calculations of all the other people that worked with you to get your material. But your empirical formula calculation is the one that should be done and should be included in your calculations section. You must start with the formula and work the stepwise through the calculations to its outcome. So if you'll look, density is equal to mass times volume. The density of Powerade is, and I put density is equal to 9.99 grams divided by 1 gram per milliliter. And density is 0.99 grams per milliliter. Okay, and you notice I put a sentence here. This sentence is really important because this breaks up the calculation a bit and explains why I'm doing what I'm doing. So you're still writing in paragraph form. You're just doing some little creativeness in the middle of it. Okay, graphs. Make sure the graphs are titled. They have axes labeled. They have appropriate scales on both sides. And it accurately represents the data and uses best fit curving when appropriate. Now, you have data that doesn't really show best fit curving necessarily because you're not comparing two numbers to one another.
Sam Ross, if you're in the building, please come to the front office.
Sorry about that.
Ross, please come to the front office.
Announcement at the end of the day. Wonderful stuff. Okay. So this graph accurately represents data and uses best fit curving when appropriate. You're probably not going to have a best fit curve because you're looking at group 1's percent and group 2's percent and group 3's percent or something of that nature. So, make sure that you're thinking about that. Conclusion. Conclusion paragraph wraps up the paper. It discusses your hypothesis, uses the data to provide proof for your claim of correctness or incorrectness. You have to use data. Data is your evidence. If you don't use data, what you say is nonsense. It's garbage. It means nothing. Data backs it up. If you don't use data to back it up, you're not saying anything. It discusses why you did the experiment in the first place. What was the whole point to this? It relays any problems that you may have had, any errors that may have happened, and it also tells what you might have learned from the experiment and how you might expand to test it further. So all of this goes back to making sure you write a good conclusion, and these are the things that every good conclusion will have. Abstract examples, we're not going to look at those, sorry. There are a bunch of them there. So you basically see what I'm talking about. You now understand what you have to do to get a lab report done. So you need to make sure that you're thinking about that and you're doing what you need to do to get your lab report in on time. Your rough draft is due April 10th. We'll be talking when we come back from spring break about when the actual report is due. After we do a little work with that, there's going to be a little time that first week back from spring break that we're going to be working on the lab report stuff. But after that, we're going to be moving forward and you're going to have to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. All right, thank you.